Skippy here, and welcome to One Piece episode 949. Directed by Kenichi Takeshita and supervised by Toshio Deguchi and Hirotaka Ito. With an extremely immersive board that kicks up tons of smoke and dust on top of really well-timed action animation that's filler at that, Kenichi Takeshita looks to be heading towards another solid episode after he nailed Nakashima's board in 935, by now looking to show off his true directorial power with strong key animators like Masahiro Kitazaki putting him further into the green. With great help from the two supervisors this episode that is a bit of a different pairing than usual, with Toshio Deguchi's art looking surprisingly solid as well as setting a great precedent for what Ito will put on display, this should be one solid all-around experience in hopefully every category that will do such a character-defining moment for Luffy justice. I'm very eager to see Mayumi Tanaka nail his performance and then some, so will episode 949 end the Udon action off on a high note and serve as a great debut for Takeshita as a full episode director? Let's ready our speech and find out. This episode covers the remaining 12 pages of chapter 949, and the sheer frequency of filler within it is something that I expected, meaning that it isn't all that much and is mostly just comprised of some extra fighting in the first half, but I think that's just about what it needed to properly portray the canon content. Sure, while maybe a cutaway to something that's likely going to be fillerized within the next few episodes might have helped out the slower parts of it, but the room that the canon content is allowed makes it so the voice acting on display can show off in spite of that in tandem with the music placement, to create a pretty powerful feeling for Luffy's big scene that genuinely had me welling up a bit. It's not all perfect naturally, as there's definitely a bug or two with the storyboard that I think brings it down a notch, and we'll of course get to that, but there is still a heart at the core of everything in form of the emotional speech that Luffy gives that I'm glad it was as well done as it is, given that Takeshita is rather new to the series. Sometimes it may feel like a pretty dense episode since there's only a tinge of action filler and it only really focuses on a certain plot point, but I can't say I was let down when it comes to bringing such a cherished and moving scene for me to life, barring the overall storyboard that acts as both its strength and its weakness. While Takeshita's board is absolutely packed full of what the preview teased, with the large scale of Udon being taken into consideration during fights to make them more dynamic, and there's just a really cool sense of vibrance as far as making a character's splash page goes. But I think it sadly fumbles a bit when the speech rears its head and it feels like the board is for some reason creatively limited. There's no doubt that when dealing with denser content, no matter how important it may be, you're going to run into some limitations as to what you can really do. But it does kinda suck when a speech that I think was pretty well directed and adapted to begin with is brought down a peg thanks to a handful of repeated shots on the board that are good in isolation, but serve to really take you out of the experience when you notice just how much they're being reused. It's not a deal breaker in any way, and there's still quite a bit of stuff surrounding it that makes the board solid all in all, but it does sadly shrink the scale of the moment for me enough to make note of it regardless. Thankfully though, Hirotaka Ito's three-dimensional corrections that enhance every expression with extremely cooled very line art are in full force even in the somewhat ho-hum sections of the episode's second half. And Toshio Deguchi is surprisingly inoffensive as we expected from the preview, with his style birds from being able to draw absurdly fast fitting quite well with the expressions needed. When topped all off with the anticipated action from Masahiro Kitazaki, that stands its ground as the animation highlight of the episode thanks to his movement and timing that makes what is simpler animation and design very powerful, as well as the presumed work from Sailor Moon alumni Yoshihiro Kitano that excels at executing the board and being smooth at the same time. 949 ends up being a pretty solid outing all things considered, even with its problems at deck. It feels a bit unfortunate to say that this episode seemed to be held back a bit even when it was creatively beaming from top to bottom in a lot of different aspects, but I think what really matters here is that I wasn't displeased with the final product as a whole. There are definitely those small things that I wasn't too big a fan of, but in great part to everything else in the episode that pulls its own weight and then some, I was able to cast it aside for the most part and enjoy what in my eyes was still a pretty bang-on episode that damn near met my expectations. In terms of setting my own expectations for next week's episode 950 though, they're a bit all over the place. Yasunori Koyama finally getting the chance to storyboard his own episode again is something that I'm majorly excited for, due to how he will finally have free reign to strut his stuff with his knack for compositing being on display. But Masahiro Shimanuki's corrections that I'm, as you all know, not much of a fan of, look to inhibit that same stiffer edge. Of course there's always been episodes that had great direction but weaker art, and Ichikawa will definitely be hitting the pencil as as far as chief supervision goes, so I'm not worried in the slightest about its overall quality, but more just conflicted about how one of my favorite regular directors is being paired with one of my least favorite supervisors. Anyways, guys, that's it for now. I'm Skippy, and they kind of foreshadowed this a bit by reusing Shimanuki Babanuki this episode if you really think about it.